The sun hung low over Vatican City, casting golden rays across St. Peter's Square, where thousands gathered, their murmurs rising like a tide. Karoline Leavitt stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding, clutching the small silver cross necklace her grandmother had given her before she passed. It was more than jewelry, it was a tether to her roots, to the tiny Minnesota town where she'd grown up, where faith and kindness were as vital as air. At 25, Karoline, a young journalist, had come to Rome to cover Pope Leo XIV's global summit on compassion, but she never expected to be at the center of a moment that would change everything. Karoline's journey to this moment began weeks earlier, when her editor at the Star Tribune assigned her to report on the Pope's initiative to unite world leaders in a call for empathy. She was an unlikely choice, new to the international beat, her bylines mostly on local stories of community heroes and small-town triumphs. But her editor saw something in her, a spark, a sincerity that cut through cynicism. "You write with your heart, Karoline," he'd said. "The world needs that now." So, she'd packed her bags, her cross necklace tucked beneath her blouse, and boarded a plane to Rome, nervous but determined. As she stood in the square, the crowd parted, and a Vatican aide approached. "Ms. Leavitt, His Holiness requests your presence," he said, his tone urgent. Karoline's stomach churned. Why her? She was just a reporter, not a dignitary. She followed the aide through marble corridors to a small, candlelit chamber where Pope Leo XIV waited, his presence both gentle and commanding. His eyes, warm but piercing, met hers. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice soft yet resolute, "please, take off the cross." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karoline's hand flew to her necklace, her fingers trembling. "Your Holiness, I don't understand," she stammered. The cross was her anchor, a symbol of her grandmother's lessons in love and sacrifice. The Pope's gaze softened, but he repeated, "Take it off. Trust me." Her heart raced, torn between respect for his authority and the pain of parting with something so dear. Reluctantly, she unclasped the necklace, placing it in his outstretched hand. What happened next would stun the world. Karoline expected a reprimand, perhaps a lesson on humility or protocol. Instead, Pope Leo XIV turned to a table where a young boy sat, no older than 10, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. The boy, introduced as Matteo, was a refugee from a war-torn nation, invited to the summit as a symbol of hope. Matteo's hands fidgeted, his small frame hunched under the weight of loss. His family had perished in conflict, leaving him alone. The Pope knelt beside him, holding Karoline's cross. "Matteo," he said, "this cross belonged to someone who knew great love. Now, it is yours, to remind you that you are never alone." Karoline's breath caught. She wanted to protest, this was her grandmother's cross, her last connection to her. But as Matteo's trembling fingers closed around the necklace, his eyes filled with tears, and something shifted within her. The Pope stood, addressing the small group of aides and reporters in the room. "This cross," he said, "is a symbol of faith, but faith without action is hollow. Karoline's gift to Matteo is a spark. Let it ignite compassion in us all." The room was silent, but Karoline's mind raced. She thought of her grandmother, who'd spent her life helping neighbors, feeding the hungry, and teaching Karoline that kindness was the truest form of strength. Giving up the cross felt like losing her, but as she looked at Matteo, clutching it like a lifeline, she realized it was the opposite, it was keeping her grandmother's spirit alive. The Pope's act wasn't about taking something from her, it was about showing her how to give. Word of the moment spread like wildfire. By evening, Karoline's story was trending globally, not because of her reporting, but because of what she'd done, or rather, what the Pope had inspired her to do. Social media buzzed with #GiveTheCross, a movement urging people to share something meaningful with someone in need. In Minnesota, a baker gave his day's bread to a homeless shelter. In Tokyo, a businessman donated his bonus to a children's hospital. In Cairo, a teacher shared her books with students who had none. Each act, small or large, echoed the Pope's challenge, to give not from abundance, but from the heart. Karoline returned to the square, where Matteo found her. He ran to her, the cross gleaming against his chest, and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice steady for the first time. Tears streamed down Karoline's face, not from loss, but from a profound realization. Her grandmother's love wasn't confined to a piece of silver, it lived in every act of kindness she'd inspired. The crowd around them began to clap, then cheer, a wave of unity rippling through the square. World leaders, watching from the balcony, joined in, their applause a promise to carry the message forward. The emotional climax came that night, during the Pope's closing address. He invited Karoline and Matteo to stand beside him. "This young woman," he said, his voice booming across the square, "gave more than a necklace. She gave hope. And this boy, who has known such loss, reminds us that hope is never lost when we act with love." He turned to Karoline, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your cross has sparked a fire. Let it burn in all of us." The crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in a shared resolve to act, to give, to love. Karoline returned to Minnesota, her heart full. Her editor, beaming, published her story, titled "The Cross That Changed the World." But the real story wasn't hers, it was the world's. The hashtag #GiveTheCross movement grew, touching millions. Karoline kept reporting, but now with a new purpose, to find and share stories of everyday heroes, people who, like her grandmother, gave without expecting return. Matteo, adopted by a kind Italian family, wrote to her often, the cross still around his neck, a reminder of the day they became family in spirit. As winter blanketed her small Minnesota town, Karoline stood at her grandmother's grave, a new cross necklace in her hand, a gift from Matteo, bought with his first earnings from a paper route. She smiled, knowing her grandmother would be proud. The world had seen a single act of compassion and responded with millions more. In giving up her cross, Karoline had gained something greater, a belief that humanity, at its core, is kind, selfless, and capable of stunning the world with love. The moral of the story is that true compassion requires selfless giving, even when it's difficult, and a single act of kindness can inspire a global wave of love and unity.